Welcome, everyone. Before we begin the meeting, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. I will now call to order the Monday, September 30th, 2019 City Council work session. Mrs. Donaldson, roll call, please.
Fitzwater, Graham, Hensley, Hussey.
Here.
Kimna.
Here.
Mahalovich, Prather.
Here.
Schreiber.
Here.
Ward. Here. Wiseman.
All right, and welcome. And I would also like to entertain a motion to amend the agenda, item 3. I would like to add item 3B, the Long-Term Recovery Committee update, and then item 3C, State Representative Dave Griffith will give us an update. Is there a motion to amend?
So moved.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. So we will start with item 3A, and we have with us a group from the Missouri Adventist Community Services Disaster Response Team, and we would like to recognize them this evening for their tornado efforts. So if they would all, you recognize them in the yellow shirts. I will tell you that was something I always appreciated as we worked through the tornado, that the Adventist group was always very recognizable with their yellow shirts and name tags and everything. And you're welcome to start at the podium, and then before you leave, we'll get a picture with everybody. So we are just honored to have all of you here, and we appreciate all the work you did during the tornado. And I just wanted to have a moment where you all could tell us a little bit about the organization and what you've done. I will know that I really had an opportunity to get to know you, and also especially Jody. I know, Jody, you worked very hard, and it was funny. I remember one of those early on press conferences with United Way, and I didn't know you. We were standing next to each other, and when I was introduced as the mayor, you said the mayor in blue jeans, and it was just funny because I didn't look like a mayor, but a lot of us didn't look like what we thought our roles would be, but you were at everything, and you were always very involved, and the distribution center was a direct result of your team. You all sprung into action, and people may or may not know the level of involvement that you all had. So we just wanted to formally recognize you here at Council tonight and thank you for your efforts, all of you. So Jody, I'll turn it over to you if you want to introduce your team and tell us a little bit about what your group does.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thank you, Council. It was a privilege to serve this community when it was important, and to manage donations, which can often be the second disaster within a disaster. And so Adventist Community Services has been doing that for a very long time, and that's our subject matter expertise. But introduce, first off here, Adventist Community Services couldn't do what it does without its volunteer force, which is a total volunteer force. We don't have any salaried individuals, even myself. So our manager and one of our coordinators for Region C in Missouri is Nancy Tarasenko. She was our warehouse manager. Her and her husband Bob took care of that for us as well. And our assistant managers were Chuck and Edna Horner from Sullivan, Missouri. And one of our other assistant managers was Brian Schwerin, all the way from Ames, Iowa. Came down and spent a little over a month with us down here. And so I'll let them say a few words.
That would be you. Well, as any disaster, it's been a pleasure to help here in Jeff City. It's always, whenever there's a disaster, people think, sometimes they think I'm nuts because I get all excited. There's a disaster, we can go help someone. And that is what we do. And we just enjoy doing it and helping and seeing not only helping with the donations and the physical things, but also to talk with those survivors of any disaster and just kind of help them and give them a little hope. So it's been a pleasure to work with here in Jeff City. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we were able to shepherd a little over $750,000 worth of donated goods that have come into this community that will help tremendously to help the impacted citizens of this city and this county get back on their feet. And so it was a distinct honor to serve.
Well, we appreciate that, and I know that you all have worked in many, many communities, and not to brag about Jefferson City, but I know that you gave us a lot of encouragement as the way that Jefferson City handled the tornado, and I think that's a big credit to all of our
It is.
community and our citizens that work together to really come together, especially under those circumstances.
Yes, it does take a team, and our experience has been one of the best we've had, one of the best I've certainly had for many, many years of working here, not only with city and county administration, emergency management, but also the other peer partners that we have in the VOAD movement. It was a great honor to work with them, and everybody worked really, really hard together, and that is a tribute to Missouri.
Can I say one more thing? When you
Yes.
said with the people, but that was one thing that my husband and I, especially my husband, he was working as the donations were coming in. And every time we drove back home, he was saying the generosity of the Jefferson City people was just unbelievable. We have never seen, in all the disasters we have worked at, the donations from your people, that the carloads, the caravans of 7 or 8 pickups, and people just piling out of them, and the donations just coming in. So your people are wonderful around here.
Wow. Well, we are very proud to hear that. That makes us very happy, and we are very appreciative. So thank you very much. And I do want to ask, does council have any questions or comments at the moment? And I know, Jody, you have a special announcement you wanted to mention. What's that tonight?
I alluded to the fact that, in a volunteer organization, the value is in the people. And so Adventist Community Services has been around. We're one of the oldest VOAD or voluntary organizations, faith-based, in the country, dating back to 1874. And one of the things that I couldn't be prouder of is my volunteers that stand behind me today, our managers. And I want to announce the fact that it's something they don't even know yet, but that next week on Wednesday, October the 9th, they're going to be honored with the Missouri Volunteer of the Year Awards at the Missouri Show Me Partnership Volunteer Symposium and Conference over at Lake of the Ozarks.
Wow, congratulations. That's pretty awesome. Well, let us be the first to congratulate you on that award. So you said that's next week at the lake?
Yeah, that's for Chuck, Edna, and Nancy and Bob.
Wow. Well, we are very proud of you, and I can see why you all will be recognized with that great honor, Volunteer of the Year, because I can tell from what you've done here in our community. We're very blessed and very fortunate, so congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, we would love to get a picture of you all. If you want to come forward, and we'll have council come up behind us and have a picture to celebrate this moment.
I was going to crop it out, but that's a good idea. Awesome.
Well, that is exciting. We've enjoyed at our different council meetings having an opportunity to recognize groups that have really assisted during the tornado. The next item, we're going to talk about the Long-Term Recovery Committee and give them a few minutes to share what their efforts are. And so I'd like to invite Ann Bax from United Way, and then anyone else that's here from the Long-Term Recovery. I know there's several of you. If you could come to the podium. And we're going to start with, we have a short video that talks about what a long-term recovery committee is, and I know several people in the group here, you all are very familiar, but this gives council and the public just a snapshot of what that is. So do we have volume on it too?
Disasters happen in every community, and and they come in all shapes and sizes, from a simple incident affecting one community to a major catastrophe affecting an entire region. A hurricane, for example, can cause a massive storm surge and powerful winds, which can lead to flooding, collapsed buildings, fire, loss of power, and other consequences. When these widespread impacts cascade and multiply, we have a catastrophe on our hands. The government will immediately initiate a response to address these challenges. And in the Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, the emergency managers will activate plans to understand the scope of the disaster, to ensure that help reaches those in trouble, and to coordinate police officers, firefighters, and medical teams to make communities safe and secure as soon as possible. There are also a number of non-governmental community and faith-based agencies and organizations that are active during a disaster and will leap into action and work with the government to provide emergency food, shelter, supplies, and more to those in need. The problem is that there is often little communication between different agencies and organizations serving the same community. And even though they can help one another, they may not be aware of each other's efforts. Without information about the operations of other organizations, they could potentially hurt their local recovery effort by duplicating resources, wasting funding and time, putting field staff in danger, and even directly hindering another organization's work. For example, let's say that we encounter a certain community that's been affected by a disaster, and there are two organizations that have decided to lend a hand and supply much-needed resources. Since they're not communicating with each other, imagine they are both providing home cleanup kits. But neither of them is providing food, which the community needs. With a quick exchange of information, one of the organizations could start providing meals. This way, two of the community's needs will be met. During a disaster, these connections are best made through communication networks coordinated with the local Office of Emergency Management. These networks bring together community organizations and agencies during a response. Since the emergency managers in the EOC have a big picture view of what is happening, they can interact and share information. An example of one of these communication networks is the local Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, or VOAD. VOAD is a network of non-governmental, community, and faith-based agencies and organizations that specialize in disaster services and convene on a regular basis for information exchange, even when there are no disasters. Although each agency or organization is in charge of its own operation, the members communicate with one another so they can share emergency information and coordinate emergency efforts to provide vital services to those in need. Oftentimes, VOAD has a representative that sits in the EOC with the emergency managers and can help provide critical information on unmet needs and available resources. Some are affiliated with national organizations and should link with them, as these larger agencies will be present during a disaster as well. It is critical to understand that these connections cannot be formed during the chaos that surrounds a catastrophe. We must connect before a disaster strikes and stay connected. Learn how you should connect with your local emergency management office now. From them, you can obtain accurate emergency information and details on how to volunteer. Visit their website and become familiar with the different programs and educational materials that are offered. Sign up for emergency alerts if available. As soon as disaster strikes, check with your local emergency management office to see if it's safe to go into the affected zones, and then determine how you can join the team and help your neighbors. You should also become familiar with the VOAD in your jurisdiction and introduce yourself and your organization or agency so that when disaster strikes, you can be an effective part of that response. To make our communities as safe and secure as possible, we need to bring together all of our resources, connecting our government partners and responders to our professional and voluntary non-governmental agencies active during a disaster, as well as to our neighborhood-based community groups. When we do that, we create an emergency team that has the best experience, the best equipment, and the best local knowledge to deal with any disaster of any shape or size.
Welcome to all of you. We have, that kind of gives us a good outline of what we do when we work together, and that everybody has such an important role in this, and that we all are definitely a team. So I would like to turn over to Ann Bax from United Way and give us a brief update on what the Long-Term Recovery Committee efforts are, and then we can have everybody introduce themselves and tell what their piece of the long-term is.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor Carey. So thank you for having us. And first, I want to just to piggyback on what the Adventists had to say. They have been a tremendous, not only the donation management piece, but Jody has headed up the Missouri VOAD for years. And so the Long-Term Recovery Committee that we have put together, still putting together, is based off of best practices from national VOADs, Missouri VOADs, and that's Volunteers Active in Disaster. Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. So, you know, the protocols and the policies and the structure of the Long-Term Recovery Committee is based on those best practices. So we're really grateful to Jody and his team for leading us in that area as well as Steve Tatlow and Deb Hendricks from SEMA. We have leaned very heavily on them, and they have been so good to support us. And then also to Mayor Carey and to Steve, it's been really important for us to connect with you as a city and then the county as well. So Bill is representative of the emergency management, but also the county officials. You know, we have really been a team, and I think we do have a lot to be proud of because with that foundation that the government entities have laid, and then all of these great health and human service agencies and faith-based groups, we are operating as a team. So I think we've started off on the right foot. Even though it seems slow, we have a really good structure in place. So that Long-Term Recovery Committee, we have a board of 12 people that are the voting board that will be, when cases are brought before us from Catholic Charities, who is the case managers that SEMA has appointed, when they get those cases brought to us, that will be the group that votes. But behind that 12 body, there's also subcommittees that are, we have had meetings around this community as well as in Miller County, because this long-term recovery group is also representing Miller County. And so we have invited community members in to be a part of that, because we need everyone to know that they are welcomed and needed to make sure that we do the best job we can to help our disaster survivors recover and our whole community rebuild. So again, we are right now we have bylaws that are drafted. We have an MOU between the Long-Term Recovery Committee and the United Way as the fiscal agent, and that is being looked at by people a lot smarter than myself, and then we will bring it to the Long-Term Recovery Committee to vote to make sure we have all of our I's dotted, T's crossed, to make sure that we are ready. But I, again, can't say enough about these great people behind me. It's been heart-wrenching last couple months, but also heartwarming again to see. It's really neat to hear the Adventists talk about it coming into this community. We all know we have a remarkable community, but to see everybody come together to make sure that we are working in the best interest of our community has been great, and we can't operate in silos. Otherwise, we're not being efficient with our donor dollars, we're not being responsive to our donor dollars, and we're not best serving those people who need us. So again, right now, we are just Catholic Charities has about 50 open cases, and a lot of those cases cannot be brought to the Long-Term Recovery Committee yet, because they're still waiting on their FEMA approval. Some of them have been denied, and so they have to go back through the process. So that's really the first layer of support for disaster survivors, or insurance. Unfortunately, many didn't have it, but even if they did, the next layer is FEMA. And as we all know, FEMA was here until September 9th, and then people have up to 2 months that they can appeal if they get a denial. So all of that final FEMA information for a disaster survivor has to be figured out before they bring cases to us to ask for local assistance. So I'll let anybody else want to add anything to that, or?
Sure, if you all could introduce yourselves and say maybe which agencies you all are with, and so we'll, I know we know you all, but we'd love to have that introduction.
Bill Farkle, County Jeff City Emergency Management. Thank you for this opportunity. So to back up a little bit with Jody, you know, in my line of business, this is the first time I've seen that move so fast. You talk about a man with connections. Within a couple of weeks, he had 4 tractor trailer loads of Executive One furniture, brand new, unloaded out at their the distribution center. So we were already ready for beds, brand new mattresses, things like this, along with a lot of our other donors, which really helps those people once they start to get back in their homes. So not only the food we call consumable goods, but then the durable goods is later on. That was very, very important. So a great group. And I just want to pass along to the city council, and I have to the commission before. When FEMA took 5 weeks at our office with the Disaster Recovery Center, getting to meet several of the higher-up people, literally from Washington, D.C., come down to see this because they set up a joint field operations here as well. When you hear those people that do this every day all over the United States and other parts of the country tell me that our community has come together so fast with a short-term recovery and a long-term recovery, how well that's moved along. First time some of them seen that. So I think it's very proud of our community. Not just one person, all of us together as a team. So that's a great tribute to all of us. Any questions? All right.
Thank you.
Who else? We need a preacher up there.
All right, Pastor John.
My name is Pastor John Nelson from Soma Community Church here in Jefferson City. I don't have much to add. I just want you guys to know that faith-based organizations are well represented on this long-term community, and we thank you so much for your support and what you guys are doing with us, and for Ann helping to really organize this. This has been an amazing effort, but we have a long way to go.
Thank you.
I'm Captain Justin Wendell with the Salvation Army here in Jefferson City, and I'm kind of in the same boat. I actually wasn't here for the actual disaster. I came after, that's when we were transferred here. But I gotta say, this is our fourth appointment, and this is probably the best community cooperation we've seen, and I think that speaks a lot to agencies like Ann and the community as a whole that's come together to work, and I just really appreciate that, especially as an outsider coming in. It's been very helpful, and seeing us all work together has been great.
We appreciate it.
Good evening, I'm Angela Hirsch. I'm with Central Missouri Community Action. And as Pastor John said, this has been an amazing effort. The response effort was incredible, and I'm thrilled to have been able to be a part of that. But we do have a very, very long way to go. And I think that as we put our plans in place and decide where we go from here and how we continue to build on our recovery is going to be very telling, and I'm excited to be a part of that. So I want to thank you all again for your support and what the Long-Term Recovery Committee is doing and what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan with Habitat.
It's me again. As Ann mentioned, I have been the most recent past chairman of the Missouri VOAD for all of the faith-based and response organizations here in the state. I want to second what Bill had mentioned. The fact that here in Missouri, we have a very strong VOAD movement, voluntary organizations active in disaster, and we really do lead in many ways the country for how fast and how well we work together and make things happen. And so I just wanted you to know that the fact of what's been happening and what Bill has mentioned of outside those that see and watch and see this on a monthly basis around the country, what they said was the real truth. The good news that while you've heard we had a long way to go and it was devastating, just a quick little euphemism, you take a 2x4 and you break that 2x4, and you take and glue it back together. When that glue hardens and dries, that 2x4 where that break is will be stronger than the 2x4 was in its original condition. The same applies for a community that's gone through a devastating disaster. When they come together and work together, there's a unique thing that happens. That community becomes much, much stronger because of the disaster than it ever would have attained if the disaster had never happened. So it's a blessing in disguise, so to speak, and so it's really exciting to see what's happening here in Jefferson City, and just so grateful to be a part of it.
Well, we appreciate it, and we're absolutely stronger after the storm. And while we have you all here, I'll see if council has any questions, and I'll start. If there's anyone out there that still needs to connect with help or still needs resources, what would be the best course of action? If any of us encounter anybody who's tuning into the meeting this evening could share that. And you can speak, I should say, speak into the mic, too. Thank you.
We're driving everyone to Catholic Charities now because they are the frontline case managers.
And do they call your office, or what's the best connection? Is that
They can
still-
call our office and we can direct them, or they can call Catholic Charities, but I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Why
But
don't you give us your number just in case?
sure, it's
and-
636-4100.
Okay.
It's the United Way office.
All right. And does council have, and also while we're talking about the distribution center, is there any announcements that need to be made about distribution? Or I know that's working through case management, so everything's moving forward.
It is, and so now the Farmer family has been kind enough to allow us to move the recovery items to the Sears wing of the mall. So we are all moved in, the advances are still there, but they are transitioning. They will be leaving us in the next couple weeks, and Catholic Charities is going to take over that piece of it as well, which really makes sense because they are working with the case management piece, so there's not going to be a disconnect. So we actually had a meeting today, and Catholic Charities understands what the role looks like, and they've agreed to do it, so we're very excited about that, and they're going to start shadowing Edna and Chuck and Nancy for the next couple weeks to learn the positions, and then they'll be doing it from there. But yeah, so there's furniture there. There is the donated items that Jody talked about, but none of those items go to a family until they've been case managed, and those case managers actually go to the homes or go to what was the home, and they verify and vet everything again to make sure that we are doing a really good job of putting those donations into the disaster survivors' hands as quickly as possible, and where the need is, knowing that the need is really there. So.
Great. And if people still want to donate, would they contact you before they go to the distribution center if they have items?
Yeah, the donation center, really the things that they're taking now are new. We're purchasing some new furniture with funds that we have, and then we have the donated furniture. If they have anything they want to donate, yes, have them call the United Way office. And because we're really not, there's not been really a lot of intake for the recovery items over the last couple of weeks, because we really have been purchasing those with donated funds. And then again, those that Jody spoke of that came in the first couple of weeks that they were able to secure through their contacts.
Great.
So.
Well, if there are people out there that still have some funds that would like to contribute, we'll direct them to the United Way to call you, and they can say how those resources could be spent to assist.
Absolutely. And those, just to add to that, Mayor, those funds that were donated, again, those 100% of those will go back to disaster survivors. And again, they'll be case managed, and so those funds will start to help them to recover and rebuild. And we have a lot of, and in fact, many of the folks behind me had dollars that they put out immediately. Their immediate response, and did such a great job there. And now the funds that United Way has, that we basically said they were for intermediate and long-term disaster recovery. And so this group is ready and waiting to, once those are vetted, then we'll be ready to put those funds to assist those disaster survivors. So
wonderful. Does council have any questions or comments? Okay. Well, I know from day one, you all have been at the table, and almost really before day one, a lot of you had already assembled. Like what the video showed, the fortunate thing for our community is everybody already knew each other and had been working together before the disaster, but really since the disaster, it has been on a continuous basis, and in fact, your group meets on a weekly basis, and so for the last several months, weekly and sometimes even more. So appreciate the time your organizations are putting in. So I'm going to have everybody smile so I can get a picture of you all, because we're going to share. Okay. Okay. All right. So scoot in Jody a little bit. There we go. Okay. So everybody smile. All right. Thank you all, and appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you. Item C, we have State Representative Dave Griffith has a couple announcements, so we'd like to welcome him to the podium tonight, our former Red Cross director.
Well, thank you for letting me, I don't want to take a whole lot of time, but I did, actually this is not new news. This actually, the press release was put out September the 9th by the Missouri Department of Conservation. And they retweeted it on Missouri Net today, and I thought it was important. Since we're having this meeting, my legislative assistant recommended I come and talk with you about this. The Missouri Department of Conservation and their community partners are offering 400 free trees to local residents impacted by the tornado damage this last spring. The distribution is going to be this Thursday. You know, that's why it's so timely, I thought, breaking that out this evening. It's going to be from 12 o'clock until 6 o'clock at 1626 Tanner Bridge Road, and there will be street sign pickup. And there are a number of different trees, Missouri trees that will be available. But I think those that have been impacted by the tornado, part of the rebuilding process is to rebuild the outside of your house as well. And each one of these survivors will be given 2 trees. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody in the city knew about that. There will also be distribution down in Eldon as well. The trees will be available until they're all gone. So I would encourage all those that are watching on the stream and streaming this, that they stop by and pick up some new trees.
Well, that is fantastic. We appreciate Department of Conservation doing that this Thursday, 12 to 6. You said 1626 Tanner Bridge Road.
Correct.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you for your participation,
Okay.
Representative Griffith. And any questions? All right.
Get
We
into it.
appreciate it.
Yep.
And we appreciate, in addition to Mr. Griffith, State Representative Griffith, we have our County Commissioner, Sam Bushman. We also have our Senator, Mike Byrne-Sketter. Thank you all for being here. And there's also several groups represented in addition to the ones that were at the podium. We have Historic City of Jefferson, the East Side Association, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, SSM Health, and the Housing Authority, along with some local residents. So there is an opportunity for public comment, but if any of those groups have anything they need to add, please let me know. We want to keep the information coming. So thank you all for being here this evening. At this time, I'll turn it over. Item 4, we have an overview of tornado flooding estimated cost. And so we're going to have a snapshot of this moment in time of where we are. So I know we have a long way to go, but we're going to see where we are today.
So appreciate that. Mayor Turgeon asked staff to provide an update really on some numbers year to date, and then also some structures, which will be the second part. I do want to say thank you to all the employees, federal, state, and local elected officials and staff, volunteers and citizens, many of them recognized tonight, the various faith, service, community, and nonprofit organization, other cities and counties that assisted us. And we also thank residents, business, and visitors for their patience and understanding during the events. The financial document, copy of it is available over there as well, is a rough estimate of a point in time of some of the actual expenses, some of the anticipated expenses, and some of the estimates of which we are aware, really as of a point in time, which was really last week. It is not intended to be a total cost of the expenses for the city, nor other entities such as the county or state or even individuals. It really is just a cost estimate from what the city has experienced thus far. It is not intended to be the total costs of the event. We know that there are additional expenses that are forthcoming, but we did want to give just an order of magnitude of some of the costs, and we can certainly walk through all of those or individual categories if you want. But overall, we're looking at, as of thus far, tornado-related expenses of about $1.5 million, flood-related expenses of about $2.7 million, for a total of about $4.25 million. And again, that is just as of year to date. We expect additional expenses to occur, and some of those they were just is too early in the process for us to be able to even estimate, for example, related to the airport terminal. So that's a brief overview, and certainly available to respond to any specific questions if there are any.
Any questions for Steve at this time?
I just want to reiterate, it is not the amount of money that we will be submitting to FEMA for reimbursement or any FEMA-related costs or insurance proceeds or any other possible funding sources out there. It really is just kind of a snapshot, a picture as of last week on the expenses to date. And then some of that we also anticipate. I don't know if directors have anything you want to add to that, or if there are any questions. So.
Any directors' input, city staff at this time?
Okay.
Councilman Hussey?
I get that some of these are just estimates. I guess I would want to add that $4.25 million, but gosh, 2.2 million of that's coming out of wastewater, right? Which is some estimates on some work that needs to be done.
Right.
And so when we talk about estimates on that, is this work that we anticipate needs to happen, we would like to have happen? And if it needs to happen, with that particular fund, I mean, that's a separate funding source for us from general revenue, and so how exactly would we tackle $2.2 million worth of wastewater work?
Yeah, I can answer that if you'd like. So yeah, a big chunk of that is the repairing damage to the riverbank where we have a major sewer line, and about $2 million is the working estimate now. So that would have to be covered initially by the fund, wastewater fund, although we're working with FEMA to see what reimbursements may be available. I think as Steve said, this was an itemization of money that we spent, even staff time and all that. Even we might already pay these guys, but for other, usually street work, for example, but they switched to tornado or flood work, and some of that work you might get reimbursed for, some you may not.
I'll just note that we did have our initial scoping meeting with FEMA last week, so that kind of starts the process, and it is a process, and there's some, submittals and a lot of work that needs to go into that, but we hope and anticipate that there'll be some FEMA reimbursement for some of these expenses, certainly.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, so in that case, we can do item 5. Did you have something to add?
No, I was going to say the next one is really an overview of some of the structures in the community, and I think Sonny was going to start that one. Is that right?
Sure. Just then I'll turn it over to Eric. Eric Barron has been our planning services manager. Has been working on keeping track of the status of the built environment over the past since the tornado occurred. And he has a presentation to go through that will help shed some light on where we started and where we're at now in terms of structures and housing units. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Barron.
And thank you. So what I have prepared for you this evening is what I believe to be a fairly detailed overview of damage that occurred along the path of the tornado. What I've tried to do is consolidate a lot of different information sources into a single map, a single presentation. We have a variety of different information sources out there. Immediately after the tornado, the SAVE Coalition came into the community and did a structure-based evaluation of the impact area, and so they had rankings of how certain structures that were damaged very heavily or moderately or not that bad at all. So we have that information. Also, we've processed a lot of building permits on tornado stuff, and so I've consolidated that information. We've talked to a lot of people, not myself so much, but a lot of the inspecting staff, the property inspectors and the building inspectors, really been boots on the ground literally nearly every day since the day of the event, looking at various things out there in the community that are damaged or are in the process of being rebuilt. We also made an effort to go through and basically do our own inspection of structures and get our own determination of what we feel its future likely is, kind of based on our own professional judgment. And I do need to state that this information is prone to error. It could be out of date. A lot of the information is updated on a regular basis within city databases, but as I produce the maps, it could be a couple days or more out of date. And, I feel compelled to give a general disclaimer, especially considering that, there could be groups out there, property owners that have put extensive work into repairing or otherwise of their structure. And, it would weigh heavily on me to misrepresent such information in front of this body. But I don't know any real good way to go through the community and give you an overview of the entire event without it being prone to error, and so I would just make the general statement that I'll apologize for any errors that I may have out there, and certainly willing to update information if there's anyone that has better information than me. I'm not necessarily the best source of information. With that said, the presentation is largely focused on demolitions. So we're really looking at the long-term impact of this event on the community. There are a lot of structures that are being repaired, and I have some of that data within the presentation, but the general focus is on demolition and what the plans for that property where the demolitions are occurring might be, if there are any. So up on the screen is the general path of the tornado shown in red, going through Jefferson City, reoriented north to be toward the river in general, typical Jefferson City fashion. And so at the bottom of the screen is the intersection of Highway 179 and Highway 54, Route B. And so that was basically the point where the tornado entered the city limits of Jefferson City and then continued on north toward the river. So I have a series of 9 different overviews to go through the community and to outline the damage within each slide, so to speak. And so I'll start with the first slide there, again, just north of the Highway 179, Highway 54 intersection. And so over in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I realize it can be a little foggy, especially on the projector, but I have the legend that remains consistent throughout the presentation. So I'll go over that real quick. The first 2 items on the legend is a yellow shading or a red shading of structures. And that is SAVE Coalition data. So when the SAVE Coalition went through and evaluated structures, we took that information and put it onto the footprint of the building. So you'll notice within the slide a number of buildings that are shaded red, indicating they got a very high level of damage. Later on, you'll see more buildings shaded yellow. The next couple items here on the legend is building permit information and demolition permit information. So I have the building permits shown as yellow dots. So anywhere where there's a yellow dot, there's been some sort of building permit issued there. It could be anything from a relatively minor permit to something major. I didn't scale them at all. But those are building permits that are tagged as being storm damage permits. And then the red dot indicates where a demolition permit has been issued for a property. And then the very bottom item, the red outline of property, I have labeled as presumed demolition. And so that is a category that includes several different types of structures. It can include structures that were completely destroyed by the tornado, basically were demolished by the event. It can include structures that have since been demolished with a demolition permit. It can also include structures where again, a staff professional opinion looking at the structure, trying to predict its future, or having spoken to the property owner or someone who has a clear indication of what that future is, it's to be demolished. Or a structure where there has been little or no attempt to stabilize major structural damage or the missing roof or something to that effect. We've basically lumped into this red outline presumed demolition category. So it doesn't necessarily mean they'd all be demolished. There are several that I have outlined in red that could potentially be saved, but we've still identified them as being a concern. So I'm starting on this slide, and I hate starting at the very bottom here because it's one of the most heartbreaking items within the presentation, and that is the effect on the Special Olympics building. I did receive very heavy damage with a very costly repair. They have indicated their intent to repair that building, and but have not proceeded with that quite yet. But as I said, it is an extremely costly type of repair project that they'll have to undertake. Continuing on north, there are two automobile dealerships, both which received heavy damage. Toyota has had a repair permit issued and is currently under repair. I believe it's going well. The Chevrolet dealership received very heavy damage. I believe the property owner is still looking at the structure and evaluating exactly how it would be rebuilt, or whether it would be completely demolished, or if any of the what's left of the buildings there can be reused. On north, there is a property outlined in red there. That is associated with the automobile lots. I believe it was a truck sales and storage lot. The building on the property was completely wiped out, and so it's shown in red by the tornado. I believe the property is just being used for storage right now, again associated with the automobile dealership. And then at the very top of the screen is the bowling alley. They have stated their intent to repair and reopen. So we're glad for that. I believe they've gone in. They had a wall collapse on the northern side of their buildings. They've gone in and stabilized that, but still have to do some work in terms of figuring out all the repairs they'll have to undertake. Okay, so on the next slide, again just headed north, at the very bottom of the screen is that bowling alley. And you'll see Christie Drive and Ellis Boulevard going through just about in the middle of the screen there. And so the Best Western and Burger King restaurant right there, both undergone repair, both are open. There was a structure, it was an older abandoned structure. There was an old pool house associated with Best Western from many years ago. It, as I mentioned, was abandoned, not being used. The tornado caused heavy damage there. They did pull a demolition permit, and that structure has been demolished. The site is cleared. And it's basically sitting as vacant commercial land right now. Continuing on north, the U-Haul storage facility with access off of Christie has been rebuilt. If they're not finished, they're very near completion of reestablishing their storage sheds on that property. Pretty much all of the businesses fronting on Ellis Boulevard here, the bank, Sonic, gas station, have undergone repair and reopened. In fact, many of them undertook their repairs very, very quickly. There's one structure, it's a gymnastics studio located back behind the gas station. There was a wall, the front wall of the building collapsed, and so the property owner established a temporary wall, and so they were literally reopened just a few days later. But they did finally pull a building permit to go ahead and put in an actual wall, get away from that temporary situation. And so I believe that's, if it hasn't started yet, it should soon. On the north side of Ellis, the church located here had a very high level of damage, especially roof damage. The unique architecture of their building, I think, necessitated they had to do a little bit extra work there in terms of figuring out how to fix it. But repairs to that building are underway right now. And then the YMCA, which is just off the edge of the screen here, had a wall collapse basically onto the driveway right there on the western side of their building. Again, repaired, and that facility is open. So continuing on north, and so at the bottom of the screen is that YMCA facility. Toward the left-hand side of the screen is Christie Drive. You'll see Flora Drive located right here, and Tanner Bridge Road basically on the right-hand side. And so one of the facilities that got the heaviest level of damage within the community was the Hawthorne Park Apartments. Multiple buildings got red tagged by the Save Coalition, with a good number of other ones being issued yellow tags. And so there were a lot of displaced people. In all, 7 buildings they've determined, 7 apartment buildings, each of them being an 8-plex, 8-unit building, will be demolished, and they will rebuild, I believe it's 8-unit buildings in their place. Also, their leasing office, located here toward the entrance to the site, which is off of Ellis Boulevard, will also be demolished and replaced. So 7 8-unit buildings be demolished. And a number of other ones are still sitting with heavy damage right now with blue tarps over them and such. And so those are planned to be repaired. Continuing north, and so there are 2 businesses located off of Four Seasons Drive here, a short cul-de-sac off of Flora Drive. Just to the, across the street from that is the roller skating rink to orient you. And so the Jeff City Wind Supply, a building supply house located there, was, again, basically completely destroyed by the event. They are in the process of rebuilding and will reestablish there. The next building here is an office building that was occupied by a number of different agencies. I refer to it as the Missouri Career Center, which was a sign that's on the front of the building, and a lot of the customer traffic to it was oriented toward finding employment. Anyway, the building was vacated, and our indication from the property owners that the plan is to demolish that building. With no immediate knowledge on what might be replaced there, I think they're looking at options, and probably with the general intent of reestablishing the use, but again, a little early for that. And so continuing on north, up here at the very top of the screen is the intersection of Flora and Tanner Bridge. A number of the buildings on houses on Tanner Bridge received primarily roof damage, I think, as a lot of shingles and trees falling along that street. And so the next slide is that intersection of Flora and Tanner Bridge at the very bottom. And you'll see Aurora Drive and then Mesa Drive going toward the top of the screen with Holiday off of it. So the number of yellow dots in the area is fairly minimal. As I mentioned, a lot of the repair work got underway very quickly and was, I think in a lot of cases, more roof damage rather than structural type of damage. There was one house on Mesa Drive that's still sitting in a very destroyed state. And so we have it identified as being a likely demolition. Houses on each side of it received very heavy damage as well. I was concerned about them, but both of them are under repair work, so right now. So continuing on, I get to Stadium Boulevard, and so the nature of the destruction and number of demolitions increases quite a bit from this point on. Between Stadium Boulevard and Dunklin Street, basically, refer to it as the Jackson Street corridor, basically have a total of 23 structures that we have identified as being either, again, presumed demolitions or already demolished. And so this particular slide, I have 9 structures identified. 3 of those have already been demolished, the 3 with the red demolition permit dots, and so 6 are still there. Repair permit activity in this area is a little bit on the low side, and so the number of yellow dots for other damaged structures in the area. I believe that that's largely for a couple of reasons, one of them being that the Jefferson City School District is pursuing an active acquisition of property project within this area. So I believe that a number of property owners who might otherwise have pursued a repair of their structures stopped until they get an indication on what that might involve, whether they'd sell their property or not. And so the school district, basically the area that they have mailed letters out to is basically this area identified with the blue line there. And so they mailed letters out indicating interest in property, as was reported in the newspaper. There's approximately 50 properties, I think just under 50 properties within that area. I don't have any clear indication as to how much success they're having, except that they are having some success in acquiring property within that area. We'll probably rely on them to provide you with any information or numbers if you needed that. The plans for the area are basically, well, they are a landlocked campus, and so the plans for the area, I believe, revolve around demolishing the buildings and using the space for new facilities, likely athletic facilities of some sort. And so, I wanted to deviate a little bit at this point and identify not only what some of the city plans for this area show, but also that there has been basically a long-term trend of property acquisition in this area by the Capital Region Medical Center, acquiring property and demolishing it in order to clear it for redevelopment, largely parking lots. And so even with this photo here, you'll see a fair amount of vacant space, and that is there because of property acquisition and clearance by the hospital. And so the next slide that I have here is showing demolition permits dating back to the year 2006, so the last dozen years or so. And you'll see that there has been a large number of demolition permits and demolition activity in the area. Again, a general trend of property acquisition and clearance to make it available for parking lots has been largely their intent. And so this activity was something that was looked at within whenever the city was looking at this neighborhood as a whole, as part of the historic Southside Old Munich-Berg neighborhood plan. That plan included a land use component, looking at certain areas and trying to determine what their future use should be. And this particular neighborhood, being located between two very large institutional uses, the hospital and the high school, and being located adjacent to a major arterial street, Stadium Boulevard, was basically, and showing a trend of acquisition over time, it's basically identified as an area that is likely to be redeveloped. And so within that plan, within the land use component of that plan, which is shown up on the screen, let me explain this a little bit. This is the land use component of the Southside plan, indicating future land use. And so in the bottom right-hand corner is the legend, the key. There's a lot of different colors there, but really the two important ones are the beige color, the residential single family, and then the blue color, that institutional land use. And so what that plan identified was that a good portions of this neighborhood, I guess, of course, being used as single-family uses today, are identified as retaining that use over time. But this particular neighborhood of Union, Case, and Stadium Boulevard was identified as something different, recognizing that its trend is to transform over to more of an institutional type of land use. So it's basically the adopted city plan recognizes the redevelopment of that neighborhood over time, transformation from single family to institutional. And so I have the area within that the school is pursuing, basically the buyout of properties within that area, or at least expressing interest to the property owners. And so I would make the statement that their activity there to acquire property is supported by the adopted city plan. And so I'll continue on up Jackson Street. Oh, wait. My apologies, as I flip through slides very, very quickly. And so of the 9 houses located here that are identified as being demolitions, 8 of them are within that area, within the Blue Lane area. One of them is located up on Oberman Street. And going back to this plan, you'll notice that if the school district were to expand their purchases onto the Oberman Street area, that would also be supported by the plan, but would not support acquisition of property either on Woodlawn or on up Adams Street as shown. So continuing on up Jackson Street, on this slide I have 5 houses identified in red there. You'll see there's a fair amount of yellow dots, so building permit activity, repair activity in the area is fair, is doing pretty good. Of the 5 houses shown in red, 2 of them have been demolished and the sites are cleared, and so they are the 2 red dots that have demolition permits associated with them. 2 more houses, the other 2 houses on the western side of Jackson Street, have been acquired by Habitat for Humanity. And so the houses still sit there, and so it's presumed that they would proceed with the demolition activity and add those lots into their real estate portfolio. And then continuing on up Jackson Street, you'll see Dunklin Street going through the middle of the screen. Highway 50 is right at the top of the screen. Again, a fair number of yellow dots, a high level of building permit activity. A lot of people have repaired their houses within this area. But there's also a lot of properties that are identified in red. I'll start with the 4 properties on Ashley Street. So the 4 properties with frontage on Ashley Street, starting from the west or the left. The first one there was a house that was actually undergoing renovation at the time of the tornado, and so the entire back wall was missing, and the wind literally swept through the structure and wiped it out completely. The property owner has indicated an intent to build a new house at that location. The next one here on the corner of Ashley and Jackson, on the northwest corner, is a house that had been basically declared dangerous and unoccupiable by code enforcement staff about a year before the event. And so it was a vacant structure, and Habitat for Humanity came to acquire that property. It's a very large structure, and the city has city plans were to use CDBG funding to demolish that structure, clear the site, and then allow Habitat to rebuild on it. Catty-cornered from that is a home, is an owner-occupied home at the time of the event, has had no activity on it. And then a little bit further down Ashley is a property I have highlighted in red. It's actually an old house that was being used for storage, and so the property owner's intent is to actually demolish and build a proper garage there. So then up on Dunklin Street, again starting from the left and heading right, just before this one here on the corner of Jackson and Dunklin, there's one notable property here. It has a building permit associated with it. It was a 4-unit residential structure, 2 up and 2 down. And so after the event caused some very heavy damage on the top 2 units, and so the owner actually took those 2 units off, built a new roof, and so now it's a duplex. So it's kind of a unique one there that 2 units were lost, but the structure was otherwise saved. And then on the corner of Jackson and Dunklin, a structure that has had no activity. I believe it's in process of maybe being acquired, but that is still up in the air. So then next, on the east of Jackson, between Jackson and Maple here, is a row of 3 properties. One of them, the one on the far right, has been demolished and the site is cleared. The other 2 have demolition permits, but that demolition has not yet taken place. They were all fairly small structures, and it's somewhat unique that for the rest of the tornado path, the destruction, structures that are being demolished seem to be a little scattered site. That there's not necessarily large groupings of structures that that might make way for a redevelopment opportunity. But this particular spot, actually the property located just behind it is owned by the same owner as these two, and so there might be some potential to doing something other than single-family residential rebuild at this location. It is right across the street from Housing Authority apartments, catty-cornered from a state office building, and on Dunklin Street, a fairly major road. And so there might be an opportunity to consolidate that property and do something a little bit different, a little higher intensity, possibly with a rezoning action of some sort. Then further to the right is a property located right here. It happens to be right next to the community park, the project that the Parks Department is building a lot of new park facilities here, Splash Park. And so they actually acquired this property and will be proceeding with the demolition of the structure on it. So continuing on north, kind of through the middle of the screen is Highway 5063. Where Jackson Street crosses over 5063, there is a cluster of houses there that received heavy damage, and the good news is that they're all being repaired. None of them are planned for any kind of demolition activity. The school is an item I won't touch on too much, except that I believe that the school doesn't have any immediate plans for that property, and they're still kind of evaluating their options on it. And so then downhill from the school, and of course, City Hall is located right here, City Hall parking lots, and so literally just across the parking lot here is one structure that has been demolished or removed. So on the screen I have in addition to the building permit data and presumed demolitions, etc., have the floodplain shown here with the hatching. And so the Wares Creek that flows through this area, the branch of Wares Creek, does correspond to the floodplain located within the area. Various lines there, including the floodway, the floodplain, 100-year floodplain. But really the point here is to point out that this area is subject heavily to floodplain regulations, and so there are a number of structures that are located within that floodplain. And so even the repair activity can be subject to some of those floodplain regulations, but certainly any kind of demolition or rebuild would be subject to them as well. And so it could weigh heavily on the future of the area due to those regulations and what could be replaced there. Not saying that nothing can be replaced there, but that it would have to conform to those regulations. And so literally right next to the creek is this one house that has been demolished and the site has been cleared. Currently, I know no plans for the property. Across the street from that is a gas station. It's been abandoned for many years. We have received an indication that the owners plan to demolish it, clear it out, but they have not proceeded with that yet. Just next door to that is an old residential structure that had been converted to a business use as a daycare. It did get heavy damage. The property owner has indicated an intent to demolish. I believe it was very shortly after the event came to the conclusion that it'd be a demolition activity there, but have not proceeded with anything, and the structure remains open to the elements. And then just next door to that is a dance school. And right next to that is a structure that has been demolished. It's under the same ownership as the dance school, and the intent is to use it for parking, and so leave it clear. And the dance school has undergone a repair. And so a lot of the other properties with frontage on McCarty and in the area, again, have pursued repair activities through demolition permit. There was one house further up McCarty Street, located right there, that a tree fell on, and so the owners applied for a demolition permit. It's been active for some time, but they have not actually proceeded with demolition yet. And so the next slide gets us up to High Street and Capitol Avenue. And so the Capitol Avenue area, of course, received very heavy damage. There are a lot of red highlighted buildings. Again, the Save Coalition initial inspections that took place in the area. Some owners in the area are still evaluating their buildings, so still looking at repair options and how to move forward with them. In general, I believe that there have been a large number of properties. Again, there are a number of yellow dots in this area indicating that the property owners have proceeded with repair. It's very encouraging to see a lot of those buildings undergo that repair activity. Also along High Street, a lot of buildings that have undergone repair. Of the properties that I have highlighted in red along this slide, I'll cover the ones on Capitol Avenue first. And so I have 7 properties on this slide outlined in red with frontage on Capitol Avenue. 3 of them are owned by Barbara Busher, and we're in a very deteriorated state prior to the event, along with a large number of other structures to the west of these. But these particular structures, 3 on Capitol Avenue and 1 other one, I lumped into this category of tornado damage because of their proximity to the event, and they actually received a fair amount of damage because of the event. But it is a little complicated to indicate what caused the damage, considering how bad of a shape they were in prior to the event. But again, starting on the right-hand side and moving left, first up here on the corner of Lafayette and Capitol Avenue is the Avenue HQ complex. So there are actually 3 buildings on this property. And 2 of them have been demolished, with the 3rd one being looked at to determine if it can be saved or not. And so if it can be saved, then it would be reused. But if it cannot, then it would be demolished as well. The property owner has stated their intent to rebuild on the site. Across the street from that is a building. I have outlined in red. I was a little hesitant to outline in red. It still has a roof, but it has some major structural damage on it, and it has not had any kind of repair or stabilization activity taking place on the property. It's currently offered for sale. I'm sure a lot of the rest of the community would agree that we hope that someone will step forward and undertake a project to repair that structure. It's a notable structure along Capitol Avenue, but if nothing is done soon, I fear that it will fall into a demolition type of category. Further down the street, on the corner of Marshall and Capitol Avenue, is the old Dallmeyer house. We received a very heavy amount of structural damage. The way it's been explained to me is that the structure is actually lifted and reset down onto the foundation, which was basically basically a death sentence for the building, is the way it's been described to me. And so a demolition permit has been for that property. Demolition has not taken place yet, so they have not proceeded with it yet, but that is their stated intent. In terms of rebuilding the property, they don't know yet. I think they're still evaluating, the property owner is still evaluating options on that. Across the street is a Barbara Busher property. Again, it was in a fairly deteriorated state before the event. It was vacant. In fact, all 3 of the properties by Barbara Busher on Capitol Avenue were all vacant. On the north side, 2 multi-unit residential buildings have been vacant for many years. One of them, I believe, has a tree that has fell onto the property. And so then there's one building located here. I believe it has 2 addresses, so you could think of it as 2 buildings together. They recently applied for a demolition permit and received a very heavy level of damage. So along Capitol Avenue, 7 structures, 3 of them were in a vacant, deteriorated type of state beforehand, but 4 that I have outlined in red that are not owned by Barbara Busher. Off of Capitol Avenue, There's one additional Busher structure located right behind Marmaduke House. It's in a very rough shape. I believe it had an outbuilding real close to it that was completely swept up by the tornado. And then on Marshall Street, there's one building. I believe it was a vacant residential duplex, and it received some structural damage necessitating its demolition. There's a very similar building located right next to it that's owned by the same property owner, and their stated intent is, at least at this time, probably to demolish and use it for parking for the adjacent neighboring structure. And then on High Street, there's one building, again, an old residential house. It's on a very narrow lot, and it's very close to the neighboring structures beside it. I have not gotten any indication, but it is a demolition type of result that will happen there. Although it would probably be a fairly complicated demolition activity, being as it's so close to the neighboring structures. So the next slide I have here is I basically just turned the zoning map on top of this. And it's basically just serves as a reminder that for this area, there is an overlay zoning district in place for the Capitol Avenue area, regulating some site design elements, but primarily architectural elements for new buildings or buildings that are undergoing a facade or innovation or otherwise. So any building that's rebuilt within this gray area that includes that overlay district would be subject to that overlay district type requirements. I'll also note that in the event that there's something that a property owner is looking at doing that might not align with that overlay district perfectly, there are other options to bringing forward a project and getting basically a legislative type of approval for a project rather than working strictly within the overlay district. But I would suspect that most property owners looking to reconstruct something in that area would not find it overly burdensome to comply with the overlay district regulations. They were basically put in place as a minimal type of regulation, whereas most property owners would likely, if they're investing in that area, would be building at a level above that. The Avenue HQ property is governed by a PUD, a planned unit development. And so what would likely occur there is that when a new development plan is put together by that property owner, they would likely bring it forward through the typical PUD process, through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for approval. We'd be looking at some of the architectural elements to make sure that those fit in with the area. But it is a different site, a little bit unique compared to the rest of the street. And so the next several slides, I have some statistics laid out in terms of what this, some of the damage and what some of the plans are as we've tried to compile them. Some information, again, we don't necessarily know, but we think we've got a fairly good handle on how many structures are likely to be demolished, give or take a few, and what their future use is likely to be, with some falling into an unknown category. And so this particular slide I have outlined how many demolition situations we've identified so far. Again, all the properties that are outlined in red within the presentation have been cut up into two different categories here, the top one being residential style buildings. So these are usually older houses, either houses that were single family use or in the event of some of the stuff along Capitol Avenue, things that were formerly houses as opposed to being constructed as a commercial building. I wanted to look at those independently. And so 36 residential style structures is the count that we came up with 9 of those having already been demolished and 7 more being in a pending status. So the property owner has applied for demolition permit, they just haven't proceeded yet. And so that leaves 20 still out there. And then we're looking at commercial structures. And so this includes the apartment buildings, again, primarily within the Hawthorne Park area. So these are the larger structures. We identified 15. 5 of them have already been demolished, and 10 of them are still out there, with 8 of those 10 actually being within the apartment complex. So that's really the primary source there. And so the total down here is total, call it primary structures across the city of 51. Again, subject to moving, one way or another very easily. And so of the 20 remaining residential and 10 commercial, so a total of 30 remaining structures out there that have not either been demolished or a permit pulled. This are the different categories that they fall into. And so this slide is relevant as kind of an indication of how many situations still exist out there in the event that the city needs to get involved in this type of demolition activity. And so within that school buyout area, we've identified 5 properties. Okay, so hopefully that would be accounted for within that project. 3 properties have been acquired by Habitat for Humanity. 2 acquired after the event, 1 before. And so there's 3 that Habitat for Humanity is holding. And then in the commercial category, as I mentioned, 8 of the 10 commercial units are within the Hawthorne Park complex. 7 of those are apartment buildings, and then there's 1 leasing office, with 2 other commercial type structures out there. And so the primary concern would be the bottom part of this page, the unknown type events. So one structure on Capitol Avenue, and then of what's left, these are single-family type structures, 3 owner-occupied and 4 rental type of structures out there. And then 4 structures owned, again, by Barbara Busher. And so that's kind of the spread of the different situations out there and roughly the categories that they fall into. And so the next slide I have here is we've tried to get an indication as to what the future use of the building would be. In some cases, the property owner has a plan. In some cases, we look at it and have a pretty clear indication based on our experience here in the city. If an older house in an older neighborhood is demolished, what is its future? Sometimes it's rebuilt. Sometimes it's paired up with a neighboring property. But this is the spread of what we've identified as future uses for property. And again, the total down here is that total of 51 total properties that we've identified as being potential demolitions. And so 35 of the properties we've identified as being either rebuilt or reused in some manner, that it's fairly clear that the property owner is pursuing a reuse of the property. So 9 of those are single-family home rebuilds. That's our best guess on how many single-family homes will be rebuilt after the event. 8 buildings are apartment rebuilds. Again, that's Hawthorne Park, all 8 of those. And then the rest of the categories here, commercial rebuild or reuse, commercial properties that are being reused in some manner or possibly rebuilt. There are, I believe, 2 rebuilds and 2 reuses. In other words, not building a building, but still reusing the commercial property. There are 5 situations out there that we figure, well, actually, the property will be left vacant and will be attached, or is already attached to the neighboring property and be used for parking or driveway or something similar to that. Some of those were, again, were under a common ownership to begin with. The lots are so small that it'd be very difficult to rebuild anything there, and the likely future is for acquisition by a neighbor. And then 9 properties being located within that school buyout area. And so then the next category is the future development or unknown. So it's not necessarily that it's unknown what its future is. In some cases, vacant commercial property is a very good future. It's just another vacant lot there that used to have a building on it, but due to the event is going to sit vacant for a while until rebuilt, probably by something different. And so we have two properties identified into that kind of vacant commercial category. But the next one here with a 5, that is a consolidation with neighboring property. And so there was one event, especially there along Dunkland, where there's 3 properties in a row that we figured could probably be consolidated into a single lot. That's where that comes to. And then there's one other location in town, basically the gas station located here very close to City Hall, where that might occur as well, resulting in 2 more commercial lots. So you could kind of pair that up into a total of 4 commercial lots right there. Then the next category here is Capitol Avenue unknown. And so these are structures that we 2 of them we know are coming down on Capitol Avenue. The third one, unless something happens, would fall into that category too. And there's been no clear indication as to whether anything would be rebuilt there. The next category is Bishop property, a total of 4 properties, 3 on Capitol Avenue, 1 located right there behind the Marmaduke House. And then we have another category. Both of these properties, I think, are very small or unique. They're there because they're kind of unknown what their future might hold. We'll probably figure that out at a future date. And so this next statistic, and this is the last slide in my presentation, is what we've put together in terms of impact on the community's housing situation. Okay. And so up at the top of the screen, I have 2 different calculations here. The top one is how many housing units we believe, or if we were to compare how many housing units we have today compared to the day before the event, what would the difference be? Not indicating any other growth within the community, but purely because of the event. And then the bottom calculation is situations where we know rebuilds and repairs are occurring. Okay. So the top here, total presumed demolitions of 90 units. And so that is the 51 properties. How many units are located within those? Calculated that up and came up with a number of 90. Okay. The next number there, that 2, is that one unique situation where that 4-plex was converted to a duplex, with the top 2 units being taken off. And the next number, the 60 there, is an estimate. There's still a large number of units out there that are vacant because they're being repaired. Most of those are within the Hawthorne Park apartment complex. There are others scattered throughout the impact area. But we've come up with basically an estimate, our best guess at the staff level, of 60 units there. And so if you add that up, it's currently 152 units that are not available out there due to either damage or future demolition, or they're in the process of being repaired. Again, it's an estimate. And so of those 60 units, we believe they're being repaired, and so that is the top number within this next calculation, units that are being repaired, 60 of them out there. And so given time, those 60 units will be repaired and reoccupied, or put back onto the housing market, so to speak. And then the next item there is new apartment units. And so I believe that whole number there is from the Hawthorne Park complex, 7 new buildings, 8 units each, so 56 units. And then 9 single-family homes from the previous slide that we calculated for a total of 125. And so if you do the math then and subtract out the net loss of units, assuming all of this repair and rebuild work occurs, comes out to negative 27. That is the information I've put together for you this evening. I apologize for it being such a long presentation. I hope it's informative. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Certainly any decisions or impacts based on it, I might have to defer to others in the room, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barron, for giving us that level of detail. I think it's important for council to have that perspective, so we appreciate you taking the time to go through the entire path of the tornado through the city. And I noticed there were a couple areas that were impacted that were maybe state-owned, like maybe the Lincoln University president's residence and MSP, so I assume that's why they were likely left off of your presentation.
Thank you. That is a couple items that I did ignore completely. Some of that state-owned property, also the Missouri State Penitentiary, I did not touch on at all.
Okay, thank you. Does council have any questions or comments about this report? Yes. Councilwoman Ward has said it was excellent, and so.
Very nice job.
Councilman Hussey?
I have a question back to the school buyout zone, and I know you can't answer certain questions because you don't have the information, but do we have a sense as to how many properties have actually changed ownership in a publicly accessible database, or where things are at?
They are having success. There are properties that are showing up as having transferred on the Midmo GIS. Where they are exactly with the negotiations, I'd be very hesitant to try to either guess or even. I just don't have a real good sense there. I mean, they are having success. I would suspect that there would be a fair amount of that area that would be acquired. There's a total of just under 50 housing units there. Okay, and so that is a number that's not included in that final number that I gave of, I believe it was 27, is how many housing units acquired, by the school district that would be demolished, that otherwise would not have been. And so up on the screen, there's a number of properties. A lot of them were not repaired, but could have been. And so if you roughly guess, whatever percent you think they might be successful in terms of that buyout area, half or 3/4 or 1/4, you get the sense that that number could be closer to maybe 50 units being lost within the community.
And I suspect that there are properties in there that were not impacted in a major way at all by the tornado, and therefore it's buying somebody out who is still living in a home that's completely habitable, right?
I believe they're not discriminating on the units, and so I think that the offer is pertained to all of them.
So what happens? There's 50 units. Let's say they're successful from their perspective of acquiring 25 of them. That doesn't really help them on their desire for an institutional expansion of facilities. Like, what does that process look like for those that either don't sell, aren't in a situation to sell, are living in a home that's completely habitable and that's affordable housing for them in particular? Like, and I know this isn't our purview, but is this a situation where the school district starts using tools in their toolbox to encourage people to sell, or what?
I think they have a number of different options open to them. Again, I have not been participating in any kinds of discussions with them, and so my knowledge is very limited and not much higher than the general community. But they are a school district, and so Ryan would, I believe, say they have certain abilities to pursue options, governmental types of options. It could also be, what their patience level is. They could be very patient in property acquisition over time. As far as the city plan goes, it just recognizes a general trend of acquisition in that area. The tornado definitely sped that up. But given enough time, if they're patient enough, they could pursue this at their own leisure.
Any other questions or comments? And I think that we can also, Councilman Hussey, talk with Superintendent Larry Linthicum and have some conversations with him a little bit as well, and pose some questions to him if that would be helpful too.
I think it'd be helpful to know what role the two institutional entities on either side of this neighborhood want to play when it comes to the development of affordable housing in this community, especially in that particular area. I think there's just a lot of folks that own homes because they can, or they're renting property because it fits their needs, and I'd hate for us to displace too much of that and not have those entities at the table to help address that issue long term. We have a housing issue in Jefferson City, and I get the map that creates this for long-term plans, but there's certainly no need to accelerate that issue and create a crisis, or an even greater crisis when it comes to housing in our community. So I would hope those entities would be willing to help in that effort.
Thank you, Councilman Hussey. Any other questions, comments about this presentation? Okay, and again, we appreciate it, Mr. Barron. And then there was one other item too, while we have our director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau here. We did mention briefly MSP, and Diane, did you want to come forward and give us a brief overview of the impact on tourism in the community, and tell us just a brief comment about that?
Sure. Good evening. Well, as you know, May 22nd, after that, we have been closed down with the MSP tours. And I want to stress that we have been in communication with OA from the day of the tornado hit. We were walking the property. And they have been working with us on how do we move forward. So we, as you all know, we're going to start tours again tomorrow, October the 1st. We went to them and in our discussions asked them, is there any way that we could possibly get open for October and November? Knowing that we were going to have to recreate the tours. And in discussing with them, we have gotten that option to happen. So we will be offering the tours. We're only going to do two 2-hour history tours and 2-hour ghost tours. And those are the only type of tours that we will offer. So as for revenue, as of the end of August, we are down about $500,000 in ticket sales and in promotional items. Now that doesn't even go into the economic impact. So economic impact was probably about $1.5 million into the community. That's the revenue that we lost from people coming in, doing the tours, eating in our restaurants, buying gas, and staying in our hotels. About 25% of our attendees do stay overnight in Jefferson City. So we are hoping that by getting up and going in October, November, that will help bring some revenue into our city. Any questions?
So Diane, if people want to set up a tour, let's do
Call
a
us.
promo. Throw your number out
Call
there.
us, MissouriPennTours.com, and we will get you going strong. And the tour numbers are coming in well. We got some great press coverage over the weekend. KY3 picked us up down in Springfield, had a lot of good feedback from down in that area saying we want to come up and do tours. So they are starting to pick up on the weekend. During the weekday, it's a little bit slow, but we are booking in several private tours. So hopefully October will look good for us.
We are ready for those busloads of people to come back to Jefferson City. And if anything, when we lose that, it really reminds us of how many people were coming here in the first place. And it's more than just a number of repair for the structure. There's a large economic impact of visitors and tourism and locals alike, but that keeps a lot of our businesses and jobs going from having that attraction. So we're starting to realize just what it means when we don't have it. So
yeah, we had to lay off about 64 part-time folks for the season, and that kind of hurts when you know those folks are depending on that extra revenue during that time period. So that kind of hit us a little bit hard also on having to lay those folks off. But we're going to bring them back for October and November and do everything that we can to help them out.
Good. Well, we appreciate that update. Any questions for Mrs. Gillespie? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And we will go to item 6, public comment. And is there anyone here that would like to speak this evening? If so, you can just come forward to the podium and just give us your name, please. Welcome back, Pastor John.
Hello again. It's hard to keep a pastor from a microphone, so. Again, my name is Pastor John Nelson from Soma Community Church. I actually had no public comment until Councilman Hussey brought up his comments just a while ago. As somebody who's been on the ground since day one, like you guys have, I can kind of address what they weren't able to address from literally a 30,000-foot view. The people in that neighborhood are in a juxtaposition. Even the ones that are in habitable housing are in a juxtaposition. I can speak directly to a young man I know who owns 5 properties in that area, selling all of them either the Capital Regional or the school district. He's on both sides of that line. But the juxtaposition was either sell to somebody in the city, rent out because it was a 75% rental area, or and try to find renters that want to come back to that area, or sell to somebody out of town. And I can tell you from day one, we have people trying to purchase property, offering U-Hauls, offering to move, $30,000 cash. I have the cards to prove it if you want to see them, from day one from out of town. And so a lot of the property owners in that area have either said nothing or have decided to stay with somebody in town, which goes to Capital Regional, our local hospital, or our school district. It's not the best position. It does put our community at you're right, Councilman, that we do have affordable housing, crisis. That's the best way to put it. And we need more housing, but we're going to have to work together to figure out where it's going to be in our community, especially with the numbers that we just saw. It's something that we've been seeing over and over. There are multiple even churches in the area that are looking at purchasing housing in the area, and we don't know how to do it or what that looks like, but we're trying to figure it out for our city because we want our city to thrive. I'm glad to be here to see those numbers. I'm glad that here the council is doing that. If there's any way you guys can throw your weight around in that community to help get some of those housings, even to know that the properties on Dunkling are finally being demolished, thanks be to God, it'll be a good thing that we can do something with that. So, thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any questions for Pastor John? And speaking of housing, I know that is something else you touched on is that we are all going to have to work together in order to come up with a solution, and that's why long-term recovery has a committee, just a subcommittee, solely focused on housing. And there's been conversations with between different partners in the city. We've had Habitat and CMCA talking with the city and working together on conversations and what can be done, and knowing that hopefully in the long term, we can look back and say that the capital city was an example of all these entities working together to come up with some solutions. I know every recovery is different, but ours certainly has brought these situations to light, and we are definitely working hard on that. Any questions for Pastor John? Thank you again. Welcome. Any other public comments? We welcome you to the podium tonight.
Donna Dietz with the Historic City of Jefferson. Just a quick update with some of the statistics that Eric brought up. You all are aware that Capitol Avenue is a historic district with the state and national historic register. Just as an FYI, that is somewhat in jeopardy. We're trying to see where it stands depending on the number of buildings that do come down, and we'll try to keep you apprised of that. That area was just recognized by the state as one of the districts in peril, and we're working on fundraising as far as trying to get funds to help with the rebuild in that area. So as soon as we know anything, we'll let you all know.
Donna, for people that want to be a part of that rebuild fund, how can they contribute or contact you for that?
Just contact Historic City of Jefferson on our website, and we have various ways that can contribute to that, everything from helping us buy paint to actually helping with some of the reconstruction. We've sent architectural engineers over to several of the buildings on East Capitol Avenue and paid for those structural engineers to go through to make sure that those buildings can be rebuilt if somebody is willing to take them on. So any of that can help.
Great. Well, we know Historic City of Jefferson's taken an active role in that area, and we appreciate that. Any questions for Mrs. Dietz? Thank you. And speaking of Capitol Avenue, I did want to ask you, Mr. Barron, on page 17, where you mentioned that one kind of unknown home on Capitol Avenue so you don't know who owns it? Remind me again what the unknown piece was.
And
It is for sale, and so there's a building, a home on Capitol Avenue that is for sale. It received very heavy damage, and so, especially on the backside, and there's been no work to stabilize or repair it. And so I believe the intent is to sell it to someone willing to undertake that project.
So basically, the unknown wasn't who owns it, it's just what the future use will be, but it is currently on the market to
Correct.
be for sale.
That's my understanding, yeah.
So perhaps HCJ and other entities could help facilitate or maybe help communicate that there is some property options on Capitol Avenue. Now, that one's for sale. Barbara Buscher's for,
And so there are a number of properties that are owned by the Jefferson City Housing Authority that they acquired from Barbara Buscher, and I believe that their intent is to, sometime in the near future, to offer those up for people who are willing to undertake renovations to existing buildings. And so in addition to those housing authority properties, here's another one. I believe that, and Donna can shake her head if I'm wrong, I believe that the one that's for sale that has heavy structural damage on Capitol Avenue was evaluated by their engineer and found that it is a practical thing to save, and just needs someone to come forward and undertake that project. And so,
well, we hope somebody's paying attention and might look for that opportunity. Thank you. Welcome.
Chris Griggs, Ward 2 citizen. I'm here to speak in opposition of the vote that will be coming up tonight concerning the ordinance change for motorized bicycles. The state of Missouri has a definition for electric personal assistive mobility devices and recognizes these as a mobility device for disabled people. If this ordinance were to pass, any person riding these devices would have to get a driver's license because they're operated in the street. I personally cannot get a driver's license because I'm legally blind, and my Segway is my only means of transportation without relying on others or the bus. And so anyway, I hope I hope you were at Oktoberfest and saw me riding it in the crowds so you can see how well it behaves in public. I guess that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Griggs. And as it turns out tonight, that is actually on the next council agenda. This is a work session focused on the tornado, but the item you're talking about would be on Monday night, basically a week from tonight, council agenda. So maybe the best way for you to communicate,
I'll be back then.
Maybe we could connect with you to give you perhaps an email address where you could, if you wanted to send those comments, if you were not able to come back or to the next meeting, or if you would like to. So could somebody from staff maybe connect with Mr. Griggs to get him that information? Either Ryan or Sonny?
Well, I can be here next
Sonny?
week.
Okay. Sonny will connect with you as well to give you the meeting information. Thank you, Mr. Griggs. Welcome.
Good evening again, I'm Angela Hirsch. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Pastor John mentioned about affordable housing and let the council know that immediately following the tornado, Central Missouri Community Action provided immediate housing assistance to 157 families. That is either putting them up in temporary shelters, helping them obtain first month's rent or deposit for either a temporary or a new permanent location. Those families that we assisted with the temporary housing, 60% of those families have left Jefferson City. That's 60% of families who chances are not coming back. That's information that I think we need to be aware of as a community, particularly with the 2020 census coming up, that as we see a decrease in our city's population, that has a ramification in terms of resources that our city has for our continued growth, our future, and our planning. And that any planning that we do must include affordable housing. That doesn't mean public housing, that doesn't mean low-income housing, it's affordable housing. We're talking about families that are working those entry-level positions of your certified nursing assistants, your teacher aides, your custodial staff in our state office buildings, in our schools, your service staff and managers in restaurants and hotels, etc. And when we talk about families being able to afford their housing, we're talking about families needing to pay 30% or less of their net income on their housing costs. When you're talking about those entry-level positions, you're talking about positions that pay usually between $12 and $15 an hour. I'm not going to do the math right here in front of you, but we can figure out what that is. So that's a conversation we really need to look at, we really need to have. When we're talking about losing 27 housing units, it doesn't sound that bad. That's an impact on our community and on our families who are looking for housing to stay in this community or to return to this community. So I want to encourage us to really dig down and look into that. I want to also let the council know that that's why Central Missouri Community Action is here. This is one of the things that we do, is to help communities bring in alternative and additional resources to face crises like this, like a low-income or moderate-income housing crisis. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hirsch. Are there any questions, comments? We appreciate CMCA's involvement in that recovery process with
Thank you very
housing
much.
especially. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Jane Beadham, and I wanted to speak to you for a moment because I realize that while many of you in this room and many that have spoken tonight were very active in the response to the tornado, and that all that is very much appreciated, all the donations and the volunteer efforts, I feel as one of the few people in the room that actually has been impacted by the tornado, I have a responsibility to say a little bit on people in that situation. I certainly can't speak for everyone, and I certainly don't describe myself as a victim. We're very fortunate. We have insurance, we have resources, we will rebuild. But to let you know, we're looking forward to spending the next 9 to 12 months every day dealing with this as part of the recovery. So while a lot has been done and a lot has been accomplished, I see this as kind of the beginning point to the future. People are just now getting those reports from their insurance company, getting the initial settlement from them, figuring out how much money do we have to spend to rebuild? Dealing with the banks, dealing with everything else. So it is taking a while to get people to the point where they're ready to rebuild. And so I appreciate the documentation of all the efforts, in the current situation, but I asked this group to look forward and start thinking about how can the city help move us forward and be JC Strong in the future. We're 4 months out from the event, so we've got a lot left to do. So I wonder if the city, and I don't want to answer this, I don't want to bring up a lot of discussion, but just for you to think on, when will the city start to rebuild some of your structures that have been impacted? Obviously, the airport and the wastewater treatment center, those are going to take a long time to redesign, rebuild, but something as simple as the city parking lot next door could be addressed. That's something that the parks people have trees they could dig up in some of our parks and relocate here with the equipment that they have. That's something that would be a recovery effort that would show the adjacent tornado impacted neighbors that yes, City Hall is focused on rebuilding and does support rebuilding efforts. So that would be something that could be done fairly easily, and it would bring that parking lot into compliance with the parking lot codes that our commercial businesses have to follow as well. So I'd ask you to also consider any assistance the city might be able to give to those owners that are trying to work through the process of rebuilding. I can tell you personally, we had at least 9 or 10 different adjusters we had to deal with and 2 insurance companies for 2 properties that were impacted. That's a lot. And every day we have to deal with the accounting of, what we spent, what we recovered, trying to remember what was where, and dealing with property. Our stuff is in 9 different locations. So it's a lot for people to deal with. If there's any way the city could help, I know Historic City of Jefferson helped with the permitting early on, helping pay for some of that cost, but I don't know if there's a way that the city can provide some sort of assistance, or are people just on their own on that. And thirdly, how does the city view its role in planning and taking a leadership role in the community's recovery. I think people look to the city and want to know, what are you doing? Obviously, there's a lot of NGOs, a lot of organizations involved in the long-term recovery committee discussion, but what is the city's role, and how do you expect that to evolve? So I leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Beadham. Are there any questions for Mrs. Beadham? And we appreciate all the points that you brought forward, and I know we touched briefly on a mention of the airport. I know we don't necessarily have probably an update this evening, but we have touched on it at a lot of the Public Works and Planning Committee meetings, and have had a broader level of detail at some of those more of the committee level meetings. But I think it's also a good point that making sure that we're communicating some of that information broadly and letting people know about that as well. And the other points you had are well taken as well. Thank you. Any other public comment this evening? Okay, any other council comment discussion before we adjourn for the evening? Another point you mentioned, Mrs. Beadham, is just the long-term nature of this, and I know that with you all being personally affected and being a resident of the city, for one, I appreciate you being here tonight, but also appreciate you verbalizing some of the challenges. I think sometimes people may not realize, people think, well, you have insurance and that takes care of things, and that is definitely not the case. And anytime I've ever heard that, I feel compelled to speak up and let people know that it's definitely not that simple, and we know that. And it is going to take time. So we appreciate community members that are committed to the long-termness of this and know what it's going to take to come back better and stronger. So we appreciate everyone for being here. Thanks everyone for taking the time, for staff for giving us these reports. This is just kind of the beginning, and we have a long way to go, but we'll get there. Lastly, are there any public safety updates? I know we didn't necessarily touch on that this evening, but anything from fire, police, anything we need to add public safety wise? Okay. Well, we appreciate the update from everyone, and we will call this meeting adjourned. All right. Good night, everybody.